Hey everyone, welcome back to Chasing Success Podcast. We have a great episode for you today. We have Claudia Miller here. She's a career coach. Claudia, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
I'm so happy to be here, Zach, especially with some of the topics we're going to be discussing today.
Yes, I'm excited, and I think it's very relevant for what's going on in the market, unfortunately. We'll get into that, but can you tell the people listening a little bit about yourself and why you're here?
Of course. Well, I'm a Latina career coach, and I've been helping my clients land fulfilling jobs while still getting salary increases. And on average, my clients get around a 56% in salary increases, and they received anywhere between $30,000 and even up to $140,000 in additional earned income. And on average, my clients get jobs within 90 days or so. And these are just stats and data since COVID, since 2020, just because the market has changed so much before that. So now I only discuss more of like what's been happening in the past 2 or so years. And because of my client success, I've been featured in Forbes, MSNBC, and Business Insider put me in their top global list of top innovative career coaches.
Oh, nice. So just a little bit of achievements there. Well, I'm excited to have this conversation because you mentioned you are a career coach, and as we know, there's been tons of layoffs, so we'll go to the easy topic first. There's been tons of layoffs. I wonder if you have any advice for anybody who has been laid off, specifically the demographic that you work with, that maybe they can find some benefits here.
Yes. I primarily work with women in tech in both technical and non-technical roles. But one of the biggest things I recommend for your listeners who have been impacted by a layoff is to really work on your mindset. Because what tends to happen is when you've been laid off, and if this is the first time you laid off, it usually is very deflating, very unmotivating, especially if you just got promoted or got that position or got that salary increase. But just to give a little bit of background, data shows that at least 40% of Americans will be laid off once in their lifetime. So it's kind of expected. Know that, don't bring in shame, because I know that some of the clients that I work with, they feel shameful. Oh, I got laid off. How embarrassing. What are they going to think of me? What am I going to say during the interview process if they ask me, why did I leave my last role? How do I tell them I got laid off? And that way, I'm not seen as lesser than. So it is really all about pivoting and positioning. And this could be a really great time to discuss about why you're looking to apply to these specific companies because of competitive advantage, or you want to acquire or develop new skill sets, or go from domestic to a global impact. But it's all about how we frame it. But before we even get to that point, you really need to work on your mindset. You need to be able to be confident through the entire interview process, because it will leak out. And if you're not confident, it will impact whether you get the job offer or what kind of salary you get offered. Because if you're not coming across confident, you're also probably less than likely are going to be offered the higher end of that salary range.
Yeah, I know that whenever I got laid off, for the first and only time so far, knock on wood, but the first time I got laid off it is depleting, like, because that shame word is it's a good word to use, because that is what you feel. And I was thinking of a metaphor with that, like if you're in a relationship and you get like cheated on or something, you feel like you did something wrong, but it's actually the person that did the cheating that has to work on themselves. So I'm just thinking, you mentioned mindset. How do you coach the people that you're working with on how to get the right mindset? Because it is very fresh in their mind, and they're probably thinking, well, you're talking about mindset, I need to get another job, So how do you get your people to understand that mindset is the first step?
Well, understanding that confidence is very important. Confidence is tied to mindset. So making sure that you're coming across as confident through the entire process. And I do work with a lot of clients that are not feeling very confident. Like I mentioned, they might have been laid off, or they've been passed up multiple times for promotion, or they just found out their counterparts are making 30, 40K more than them, even though they've been working there longer, or maybe they just got promoted to a manager position and they're still being grossly underpaid. So when that time comes, you kind of have very little confidence and you're starting that job search. Well, one of the things that I have them work on, and this is why it's important, especially in this marketplace, because the market is very saturated. There's a lot of people looking for jobs. And I think I just saw a very recent stat that around 92% of individuals are looking for jobs, whether they're looking at their current job and they're employed or they're unemployed. So it's really important to make sure you stand out from the competition. So one of the things you need to really address is confidence. And how do we build up that confidence? The way that I do it with my clients is really reviewing their achievements and their impact. And usually that starts with, let's write your resume. And I know that's probably what people despise the most, where they're like, I don't know how to sell myself, but we need to learn how to sell ourselves. And one of the things that I tell my clients is, not the most qualified person gets the job, it's the one that interviews the best. I personally have had a lot of coworkers and managers where I wonder, how did you get into this role? How are you in this position when I'm the one training you? Or, we always are having issues and you don't even know the answer. And I'm sure a lot of your listeners, they've had at least one person they can think of when it comes to this situation. And that just goes to prove, again, you don't have to be the most qualified. You just have to interview the best. How do you interview the best? You need to be able to understand how to really have great interviewing skills where it does help you stand out from the competition. And that's what I work with clients. I have mock interview sessions with them. I role play with them. I make sure they get practice. I rephrase some of their answers to say, you just gave me a manager level answer and we're applying for a director level position. Here's how I reframe this at a director level. Here's how you need to be answering and start thinking of things. And that just makes it easier for them to see or hear what a great answer actually needs to sound like, especially for that level of leadership they're in. And again, they already know what to highlight when it comes to the interview process because we've already worked on their top achievements. We make sure we got the nitty-gritty, the details, the metrics. Not just I increased revenue. I increased revenue by over 20% that equated to over $20 million annually or year over year. And we have forecasted that in the next 10 years, it's going to be over close to worth $150 million. So that's very different than I increased revenue. We were very specific, and again, we're able to anchor that imagination. We're controlling the narrative, and we're not leaving anything up to chance. But again, with a lot of that comes a lot of preparation.
Yeah, and so I did a thesis paper on the Happy Productive Worker thesis, and one of the things that I got into or went down a rabbit hole on was whenever Google was doing rework, there's a segment out there on YouTube still, so go check it out. But they give you all these good tips and tricks on how to make you stand out. And that was one of the big things that I took away and implemented into my resume, which is don't just say, like you said, I increased X amount on the revenue or I achieved this. Go into, it's like a formula, and I'm probably going to get it wrong. You can correct me. But it's basically like, I did X, Y, Z through A, B, C, and the result was D, E, F, right? So people who are looking at your resume, they're not only seeing what the outcome is, they're seeing how you got there. And that's been a big game changer for me, at least. And I have family members who reach out to me asking about like resume help and LinkedIn help and all that kind of stuff. So that's some of the stuff that I give to them. But since you do specifically work with women in tech or non-tech positions, I know that studies out there have shown that whenever it comes to women, they're less likely to apply for a job if they have 6 out of 10 or whatever or they have 9 out of 10 skills, but they don't have that one, where a man will apply if he has 6 out of 10 and says, oh yeah, I'm good, I can do this. How do you work with your clients on that type of situation?
So I actually have them do a specific exercise, and you're right. On average, women feel like they need to qualify 80-90% of the job description in order to apply, versus male counterparts, they believe that as long as they meet 50 to 60%, then they're happy to apply. And that's because they focus on transferable skills, whereas women say, I haven't done this yet. And what you need to be able to have in your next role is at least a 30% amount that you don't know. So here's a quick exercise your listeners can do. You can highlight a job posting and then highlight in green some of these roles you already have experience in and you feel comfortable with, and you probably have examples. You want to highlight in yellow things that maybe you have done, but maybe you haven't led, maybe you received a certification, but you haven't used it in practice, but you have a basic foundation of it. And then you want to highlight in red things that you haven't done and have no idea what they're talking about. And ideally, you want to have at least 30 or so percent of the red. And that's because that's where you're going to be learning in your next role. If you don't have any reds in there, that means you're not learning anything in this role. You're going to fall back in your career, or if right now if you're bored, if you're procrastinating and hating going into the workplace because you're not being challenged, you're going to find yourself in the same position because you're doing the same thing as you did before. Therefore, there's no room for growth. You're going to fall back in your career. Then you're going to feel like all your friends and your counterparts and peers are all getting ahead in their career while you're still falling behind. Again, because you haven't acquired new skill sets. So making sure you have at least that 30-40% of red, that means that that's 30-40% of additional skills you're going to acquire in the next few years to help you set up for the next position.
Yeah, that's really good. Whenever it comes to, because the thing that I was thinking about, you're identifying these red pieces as areas to grow. How do you talk to the employer about those so-called gaps, right? Yeah, how do you teach the people that you work with to answer those where they still come off confident and they're saying, yes, I have this gap, but yeah, so can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yes, I have them do market insights. So what that means is I have them reach out to a network. And most of the time they actually don't have a network, so we have to build a network. And when I say build, I mean it takes us 1 or 2 weeks. And within those 2 weeks, we already got on a phone call with them when we've addressed and asked those questions. I saw on the job posting that I needed X certification. Do you find this to be true in order to be successful in the role? Yes or no? They might say, yes, actually it's very important. Can you let me know a little bit more? How is this certification or the knowledge of the certification being used on an everyday basis? So they're giving us information. We're also going to ask, what are the hardest skills to hire for? Because, yeah, we might have a gap in there, but honestly, at the end of the day, the employer is asking, can I trust you and can you do the job, and then can you be resourceful? Because many times we start this job and the work we end up doing doesn't even remotely come close to the job posting, or it just evolves rapidly that maybe what you did in job posting was within the first 3 months or so. So just know that it will change and evolve. So I don't necessarily focus on what is that red portion, what I have. I like to address it of, is this really necessary, or is this trying to be like a gatekeeper? And if it's not really necessary, can I plug in some of the information that might be useful? Or they might just say, you know what, Zach, you just need to have a basic foundation in order to know this, but honestly, you're going to be using it 5% of your time in the work when you're doing the responsibility. Well, then I might just go and watch a YouTube video and look up basics or 101 of whatever they're asking, and that way I have a good foundational knowledge. But again, I focus more on the interview on like, what are the hardest skills to hire for? What are the benefits of hiring someone externally versus internally, and vice versa? And then really even going a step further and researching maybe their company earnings call to understand where they're looking to go, how has it been, how have they been doing in the past, what are they looking to achieve, or what's their strategy for the next 6 to 12 months. And then I leverage that during the interview process, again, to help me stand out from the competition, because I know most of the other interviews are not going to go that far. They're not going to review earnings call. They're not going to go and network with people and identify what are the hardest skills to hire for. And when you focus on that, that's when no one can come close to you when it comes to the interview process.
Yeah, no, I really like that. And two of the things that I want to call out there is you mentioned networking, which a lot of people get scared about networking because it's almost like cold calling, right? But we have this amazing tool called LinkedIn that gets you to tap into the world's professionals, right? Like if I can't say this for everybody, but if they didn't want to speak to other people, they wouldn't be on LinkedIn. It's kind of like my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
It might not be true, but that's my opinion. And the thing that I've found is for my own company, I'm reaching out to CEOs and founders, and people get nervous, but these people are just like us. Like they're just people, right? And whenever you meet these people, this is no disrespect to anybody in the executive team or anything like that. Steve Jobs has a quote where he says, like, the world was built by people no smarter than you, right? And whenever you think about it like that, then you can go in a little bit more confident. And the other thing that I wanted to call out is one of the things that I don't necessarily help people with their careers, But whenever they come to me and talk about career, in interviews specifically, I tell them to remember you're also interviewing them, right? And so whenever you think about it like that, whenever it comes down to asking those questions, is this, how important is this? Or how relevant is this really? Then if it is relevant and you don't necessarily have that skill, then you can back away. Like they don't always have to tell you no, you can tell them no. And I think that's so important, especially with the layoffs happening. I know I keep talking about that, but it's like the relevant topic. That you don't have to just jump to the next company because it's the next one that comes to you. This is an actual opportunity. It could be an inflection point where you get to change the work environment that you go into. Do you want to work remotely? Do you want to have a flexible position? Do you, whatever the case is, you get the opportunity to choose that for yourself. I'm making it sound easier than it is, but one thing that I wanted to go back to was, because I know that you mentioned that you help women get into leadership roles, and you mentioned one thing that was that was a call out for me. You mentioned that they answered like a manager opposed to a director. Can you tap into a little bit, like what's the difference for anybody that might not know, and how you get your clients to think like a director instead of a manager?
Yeah, when it comes to manager, you're usually having to manage, your employees and getting the work done, almost like you're, in the field. But when it comes to director, you're managing the manager, and it's really understanding of how can you remove some of those challenges in order to enable your manager to be successful. Then after that is also thinking about strategy, because you're building that strategy, the manager's taking it in and making sure that it's diffused against all the individual contributors. So when you're interviewing as a director, it's talking more about strategy development and making sure that you have the ability to influence and be able to motivate, and how do you tie, the overall goal of the company into your department and then have it drip down, to the individual contributors. As you keep moving up the chain in leadership, that's when you start focusing again on strategy, but also change management. What is that influence? Can you help the team align with that vision, especially if there are going to be big changes? How do you motivate them? How do you make sure that maybe we can create more lean processes? How can we optimize, what we currently have? And it's like focusing on sometimes what we perceive to be small changes, but can make a big impact. Improving 2% of the overall department or the company translates to, an extra $5-10 million. Or an extra 500 hours in productivity. So it's thinking about the big picture, but making sure that you at the high level can still be impacting, be able to communicate that at the individual contributor level, and that you're all on board when it comes to that communication, that strategy, or that vision.
And then and I'm focusing on women because that's your demographic, and I think it's good for people like me. I'm a white male. It's good for us to ask these questions and seek to understand, to learn more, so we can help empower women to go to the next level. And so that's my next question. How can companies empower women to go from managers to directors, or just to continue to climb the ladder? Yeah, how can we help, or is there a specific thing that we can do?
Yeah, ideally you want to make sure that your employees, especially specifically in this situation, the women employees, have a sponsor and advocate within the workplace, that they're actually set up to succeed, and that could be looked at based on your processes and systems that you have in their company. And the other thing is, as a lot of people can do within the workforce, and there could be different types of biases, but one of the things that they can start asking themselves, especially when we have men that are allies, is if a man were to respond or act like this, would I think differently of this person? Because one of the things that I've seen is when women can, set boundaries and they're being, assertive, they're seen as they're getting closed off, they're getting emotional, or they're not invested, or they're distracted by what they're doing at home. Maybe that's why they're not being friendly and bubbly. So it's really understanding of, okay, this person responded with, Zach, thank you. Here's the information you requested. Done. Well, sometimes I hear from some of my clients where they get called in because they were not friendly enough, or the manager thought they were upset because they were just to the point versus, hi, hope you're doing well, hope all is well, wanted to check in. And it was more of that assertive language. But again, we don't hear that from when it comes to our male colleagues. So really asking that question, stopping, reflecting of, if this were to be a man, would I think differently, or would I consider that to be normal? So that could be one way that we can get more allies and for women to be offered equal opportunity, because at least from what we've seen is women actually outperform men when it comes to colleges. Women have more degrees than our male counterparts. And when we have at least 30% of women in senior leadership roles, it can increase profitability and it can add over $28 trillion into the marketplace when we have women in senior leadership roles. But the rule of thumb is you need to have at least 30% in order to see that impact. If we only have that one person in the senior leadership role, or and maybe no board of directors, we are not going to be able to see the impact. Companies are not going to be able to reap the rewards and the profitability and all the business incentives that we get. Because I get it. We all know that having more diverse leadership is the right thing to do. But we also know that the right thing to do isn't always going to get done. So I like to tie it to, what does the data tell us? How does this make business good sense? And how can it help companies be more innovative and be able to, again, gain that competitive advantage and increase profitability along the way?
Yeah, and I think, and I don't know if I'm speaking out of term or not, but I think that like when men hear something like that, they're like, oh, that's a threat to me. But like, you've had your time, you have a jump start on this stuff. But no, leading with data, I'm a big data person. So leading with data, I mean, just the stat that you mentioned there is like, why don't we have more? Why don't we have a woman president at some point? Speaking of that, like, so Jacinda Ardern, I might say that wrong, but it was New Zealand's prime minister.
Oh, yes.
Have you been following that at all?
Yes, definitely of her stepping down as prime minister, and even like some of the questions she got asked during the news report. Are you meeting with her because you guys are of similar age? No politician, especially a man, is asked those questions. And again, that's when I would advise the reporter, would you ask this question to a man? And if not, why are we even asking this question? Because at the end of the day, they're still professionals. She's earned her way to the top. She happens to be a woman, but again, we want to show and be respectful. And again, we're trying to get back to what is the story. And there could have been better stories out there that they could have asked, but they failed to miss that. And now they put themselves in ridicule for asking such a stupid question, honestly. And, and that's one of the things. And, there's just so many benefits that come along with it. And even to your point, when men might feel like, well, I'm threatened. Well, it could also be turned the other way around, where it could be, if I hire more women, they increase profitability. They also de-risk companies, and they tend to move that women that are more in the company, especially in senior leadership roles, tend to have more patents also. So when you hire a team composed of more women, you as a manager, director, or senior leadership, you can reap those rewards. And again, it is tied to your efforts. When you hire the right people, give the right people the opportunities that they deserve. And not only that, you also increase retention, you also increase employee engagement, and with that, you also have a lot of savings because you're not having to hire elsewhere, or you're not having to wait for that person to start their job. Sometimes it can take 6 to 9 months for that person to start creating or start producing actual value to the company, because it does take a candidate some time to get adjusted into the new role and the new company. So there's a lot of additional benefits that come from that as the manager, director, or senior leadership, you can start reaping that when you're starting to set up the strategy that data backs it up.
Yeah. So one of the questions that I want to ask about the data is what happens when women become leaders in the organization opposed to men, or like what are the differences that causes that data to increase, like revenue increase, higher retention, that kind of stuff? Is there a specific trend or behavior, or is it a mixture of a couple of different things?
It's a mixture, and I mean, it's a lot of things. So, for example, when they say that having more women in senior leadership roles mitigates risk, well, if there's more women in the boardroom or making these decisions, they can say, you know what, I don't think that's right because this might be interpreted this way, or we're missing another half of the customer segmentation. Yes, I agree that maybe men will approach it this way, but why don't we create a product for women because we tend to do X, Y, and Z differently, or we value things differently. And now you can tap into the other 50% of the marketplace. And then that can even double your revenue right there. Again, because you're getting that perspective. The other thing can be, maybe that's a little bit disrespectful. It can come across as X, Y, and Z for some of our customers or target demographics or our partners or stakeholders. How about we rephrase this to this or take into this consideration? And now they're not, put in a scandal for a wrong ad that they put out, or, some of the new products that came out that was very insulting or, seen the wrong way. So there are things that it's almost more of like getting that additional perspective that also mirrors more of who our customers and demographics are. Because most of the time, it's depending on the product or service that you're doing. For the most part, I would say is general population. You never know who's in senior leadership, especially if you're doing B2B. So you want to make sure that your leadership, your company reflects very similarly to your population that you're serving. But when we also get to create that diversity around it, we get different perspectives. With different perspectives come different ideas, maybe additional products, and with that comes additional revenue as well.
Yeah, and that's something that I try to do personally, and I said it on the podcast before, but as I mentioned, I'm a white male. I was born this way. And so I can't do anything about that other than try to read books by women, listen to podcasts from somebody, people of color, or whatever the case is, to get a different perspective, but then also build my circle a little bit differently than just having people that look like me. And it's the same thing with your leadership team. If you get to the highest level as a CEO, make sure that the team around you reflects differently than just you, right? Because that's where the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging come in as a benefit. Not just, yes, we want to make sure that these underrepresented people get the respect that they deserve, but also to have the benefits, right? So the reason I brought up Jacinda was because whenever she stepped down, she used the language herself of burned out. And people really caught on to that. And one of the things that I saw was, it was a quote saying, "Can women really have it all?" And that kind of made me angry. and because, like, as you said, like, would we say that to a man? Mm-hmm. No, we might even say like, "Oh, well, he's being vulnerable." Like, that's leadership, So it's just these different perspectives that people tie just because of a gender or a race or the background, which isn't always the case. Not everybody's the same. We know that. So I'll get off my soapbox there. But I know we have limited time here. So I just wanted to see, is there anything that we haven't covered that you wanted to discuss? Yeah, take it away.
Yes. My favorite topic, salary negotiations. So one of the things that I like to do with my clients, especially because I work with a lot of women and women of color, we know that they're not being equally paid. So one of the things is making sure that they know what the true compensation is for their type of skill set and the roles that they're going after. And once we know that comp range, then I always have them geared towards the higher end of that salary range. At times, it will be an extra 30, 50, and sometimes even double their salary just because they're being grossly underpaid. But even in this marketplace, even if you've been laid off and you're got that job offer, still negotiate your salary. Now, I would say if you were job searching during the Great Resignation, where all the companies were looking to hire and a lot of the employees were leaving, that would have been a better advantage. And if you found yourself like, well, I wish I would have started job searching back then because I would have gotten paid more. Well, it's almost like the analogy. The best time to plant a tree was yesterday. The second time to plant a tree is today. Something like along those lines. Same thing when it comes to that. It's easier to negotiate your salary once you get that new job offer versus internally. It is not impossible. It's just a little bit harder and takes a little bit more work. So if you do get that job offer, do your research. negotiate, because you want to make sure that you get that salary increase, because the last thing you want is be in that role, just take whatever they give you, then come to find out in a few months or so that your counterparts are making 30, 40, or sometimes 50K more than you are for the same job. Doesn't mean that they're doing additional responsibilities. You may be doing even more, but it's very imperative to negotiate your salary, even in this marketplace. And to kind of give a demonstration, I just recently worked with a client. We started working in November. She wished she would have started, back in May, June, when we had more opportunities and we had more leverage, but she still was willing to invest in herself and started in November. By December, she already signed her job offer. She had a 30K increase, landed a job in 5 weeks that was remote, and it allowed her to take care of her mom in the West Coast when she was working in the East Coast. So again, it's not like it's impossible. You just need to know what to do and in what order and how to do it. But there's still a lot of my clients that are getting big salary increases. They're getting jobs within 90 days or less, and they're still getting what they want and asking for, and still finding that fulfilling job that brings them happiness.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I mean, I can just imagine that you feel fulfilled in your job because, yes, it's great for you. You probably make a decent amount. But the big thing is that you have meaningfulness in what you do every day. You get to work with these women. You get to see the impact that you help them with. And I've talked about this to some of the other people that I've interviewed, but what's cool getting to know people like you is that it's almost selfless, right? Because you're not only impacting that person, you're impacting the lives of their kids or, like you said, their parents. Like it's just full circle. So one of the tips that I give on whenever I keep saying I'm not a career coach, but I did IT recruiting, so I think that I got a little bit of understanding. But I know that in many U.S. particularly, in many states, the employer can't ask you what you made at your previous position. I take advantage of that. So like they don't know what I made, but then I also have tons of experience from that last position. So I take it and then I throw it on top to my salary. And I'm one of those weirdos where I don't mind negotiating. I actually like it. But that does lead me into a question for you. To women or men, I feel like there's a lot of avoidance of conflict. Even though this isn't conflict, people can look at negotiation as a conflicting conversation. How do you, I know you said you do role plays, but how do you help people prepare for that negotiation?
Just let them know that it's part of the process, just like them signing that job offer. I even had on my podcast where I've had executive recruiters and executives, just share the podcast that they usually offer on the lower or mid range of that salary. So that way, when the candidate negotiates, they still have room within their budget. But the key word there is when they negotiate. If you don't negotiate, you're going to get the lower or mid range of that salary range. So they already anticipate you negotiating your salary. It's part of the process, and it's just you having to ask. And data shows that around 77% of candidates that ask for that raise get the raise. So we know that our data is already on our side. They already expect us to negotiate. This is more of you need to practice on how to negotiate if you've never done it before. And that's one of the things that's very important, because you can be leaving an extra 30-40% on the table, and that can equate to almost $20,000-$30,000 a year. I mean, imagine all the things that you can do, an extra $20,000-$30,000 a year, and then every year after that. And if you're only getting that 3-5% salary increase, then it's imperative for you to negotiate your salary, because we know that that's what you're going to be getting, and that's what the market is willing to pay for that role. So why not get paid? You're already doing the job, might as well get paid for it.
Yeah. One of the things that I've read, and I know we got to wrap up soon, but one of the things that I read is whenever you're going into a negotiation like that, you have a specific number. Do you recommend that? And like whenever you say the number, you just don't talk afterwards. Is that what you recommend, or is there a different way that you go about it?
Yes, you definitely want to have a salary range, but make sure that it's not something like a $50,000 range where it's like, oh, I'll take $100,000, $150,000. If they ask you, what budget are you looking for? What salary range are you looking for this role? give them whatever your salary is, but the upper end. So if you were like, oh, anything between 100 and 150, I'll be happy, then I would just respond. And I know that the market is willing to pay for that salary. I would just respond with, I'm looking for a salary that were between 140 and 150 based on the responsibilities we discussed, but I'm sure we can both come to a number we both agree on.
Nice. Yeah.
And
oh yeah, go ahead.
Now I was going to say, I was actually going to share with your listeners, I have my $10,000 word for word salary negotiation script that they can use. And that client I mentioned that landed her job in 5 weeks, that's how she got the additional $30,000 on top just by using the script. So you just read it from the script itself. And if you want, you can practice. Ideally, I would recommend for you to practice right before having this conversation. But it's been very successful, and at minimum, it can get you an extra $10,000.
Yeah, is that a free download or where?
Free download. Yes,
awesome.
I'll send you the link so you can share with your listeners in the show notes.
Awesome. Well, this is a perfect way to end it. Like, where can people find you to get that, or on social media just to follow some like tips and tricks, or work with you? Where can they find you?
They can find me on my website, claudiatmiller.com. They can also find me on Instagram at Claudia T. Miller, or on LinkedIn. That's where I share a lot of free career advice as well as this free download I just mentioned.
Awesome. And then I know that you have a 90-day job offer course. Did you want to speak about that real quick?
Yes, so that's my career coaching program where on average my clients get jobs within 90 days or less, and I just walk them through every step of the process on what they need to do to be able to stand out in this very competitive marketplace, how can get the job that they deserve, what should be their custom career plan moving forward, how to be able to negotiate, and that's where I offer the mock salary negotiation session as well as a mock interview session, plus I provide email support from them and bi-weekly group coaching calls to really help them throughout the process. But like I mentioned, my clients get around jobs within 5 weeks up until 90 days or so, and on average they get a 54% salary increase. The least amount I've ever had a client receive is a $30,000 salary increase.
Well, like you said, that $30,000 or above can change your life.
Yes.
In the way that you live and the way that you provide for your family. So I think that's a perfect way to end. I appreciate it. This is the first time meeting you, so I thank you so much for being on the podcast. And I think a lot of people are going to find it beneficial. And hopefully you guys listening reach out to Claudia and see how she can help you as you go into that next position or try to advance your career. But thanks, Claudia, for being here.
Thanks, Zach. Appreciate it.